Hello, I read Fire Country by Victor Steffensen in July of 2021. This book was definitely a highlight for me last year, and it's why it's taken me so many months to get to making a review. I also think this review is just going to be a bit messy because of so many thoughts that this book produced in me. So basically, this is a non-fiction book about cultural fire burning here in Australia. It's part memoir, so it follows Victor and his story of learning this management practices from the elders. You know, it's really quite funny and joyful at times, and it's very, very easy to read. But it also goes into a bit of what he learns and his approach to using fire and fire burning. And this is a complex use of fire. It really can't be summarized. And yeah, the book does go into when and if and how fire should be used, depending on the type of flora that is there in that area and what flora is next to this kind of flora. And it really it doesn't go into an overwhelming amount of detail. It's actually a rather short book. It's only around 200 pages, but I think it goes into enough detail to really display the level of complexity understanding this approach takes. The reason why this had such a big effect on me was that I grew up thinking fire equals bad. A lot of Australians are taught that and see fire in that way, and I really didn't realize how much fire had been such an important part of taking care of the land, and how it basically was immediately stopped as soon as the British settlers came because they were being attacked. You know, if you set a fire, you're basically giving away your position, and it was actually a dangerous thing for Aboriginal peoples to continue doing this practice. And so it's basically been stopped in Australia for a few hundred years now. But from a personal perspective, I didn't realise how much my view of the land, the country that I live on, had been informed by that colonialist view until I read a different way of viewing it. Colonialism and this sort of British approach says that it being like nature being wild and left alone equals good, and all intervention equals bad. And that's just not how the Australian nature works. And this book also explains why this Aboriginal burning system is very different to the back burning approach that we see, because, you know, back burning has been around for many years now, but it is a much harsher and less delicate approach to trying to prevent further damage with fire. The thing that this book shows is that to really do this cultural burning properly, is that it takes continuous monitoring of the land. You know, your use of fire comes from the cues that the land is giving you, and each area will need something different at different times, you know, and it's full-time care. And, you know, this was really natural when people were living amongst the land, when this was, you know, keeping an eye on the land was actually just like a part of your day, you know. It wasn't a job, it was just life. One criticism I do have of the book is that I wish they had photographs showing the different types of vegetation that they were talking about. You know, there is a photo insert in the middle of the book, but it really only shows the people, which is great because it's, you know, it's nice to see photos of the people being discussed. But I also would have liked a visual representation of the different flora. I think that would have really helped. I think it really comes out through this book that about how much everything is spirit in Aboriginal culture. You know, the land is spirit. Everything the land gives you is spirit. Water is alive and has to be treated as such and respected as such to be healthy water. While this book isn't literary in you know, the strictest sense, the writing is very pragmatic and sometimes repetitive, you know, but for me it makes up for it, because I think it's actually kind of rare to meet a book that introduces you to a completely new idea or a completely new way of looking at something that you've actually been looking at your whole life, and to show you a totally new lens. And that's what this book gave me, and it felt like a tremendous gift. This changed my view very deeply on the relationship between people, land and fire that can and should be happening in my country. You know, I'll never be able to look at the landscape or our relationship to it in the same way. And since I've read this, I've dabbled in some other books on the topic, but this book will always be the thing that first introduced me to that, and I'm forever grateful. in terms of, climate change and the future, I've been feeling incredibly nihilistic and very anti-human, which makes sense because a lot of the problems, or almost all of the problems, are because of human action, right? And so my instinct is to say, oh, well, humans just can't do anything right and we should just butt out of nature, but actually this book made me realize that the land does need us, and there are human actions that can help and work with the planet, and actually sometimes the planet very much needs that intervention, and just as we have the power to destroy the planet, we have the power to care for it. And that Aboriginal peoples did that for tens of thousands of years in this country. We actually need people to work with the land in order to heal it. That our species actually does have a place in the ecosystem. We just need to become more connected to that. At one point he talks about how it isn't, Indigenous people versus non-Indigenous people. It's actually about disconnected people and connected people, and how he's striving towards building more connected people with the land. He has this quote: "Being separated from the land has been entrenched for so long that the disconnected people are now everywhere, in every shape or form. Questions started running through my mind once again. Where did these disconnected people come from? How do we connect them back with the planet and culture again?" He also talked about, a holistic knowledge and a holistic approach to learning and teaching. He realizes at one point that he was making this database of all the knowledge from the elders, and he realized that it wasn't actually as useful as he thought. Yes, it was this database online that people could look up, but it was a form of Western knowledge transfer, whereas he wanted to focus on the Indigenous knowledge transfer of people to people on the land. It's a connection between the land, the people, and the knowledge all at once, because that's how you actually build confidence to actually apply the knowledge. Quote, "If we're going to revive traditional knowledge, then it needed to be done by putting it back into people and not a computer," end quote. And on a personal note, I'm learning science, and I so value and am interested in science, but I also feel like sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes I still feel this sort of emptiness inside where like ancestral knowledge should be, where ancestral knowledge used to be the norm of knowledge transfer, and now it's almost been completely superseded by this sort of academic rigor, which again has value and purpose and meaning and importance, but it's not everything, and yet we've made it everything. And so now I think we've actually sort of hampered knowledge in a way because of that. I mean, it feels like a bit of a cliche to say this, but this book really does feel like essential reading for all Australians, or really anyone, to be honest, because he also does touch on Indigenous cultures in North America and even Finland. He focuses on Australia, of course, but he does mention other places in the world. I do think it's important, as much as I've talked about, colonialism and all of this, that this book is not a diatribe at all. It touches on colonialism because, of course, it has to, but it actually in quite an indirect way. You see the park rangers and the government red tape that is keeping these people from helping their land. But the book is actually about a group of Indigenous people reviving this cultural burning and sort of falling into activism via that. I don't even know if they would label themselves as activists, but that's what it is in my view, and they are successful in so many ways. And I think we need more stories of activism being successful. I'm super lefty and all that, but to be honest, I'm a naturally really pessimistic person, and this book felt like it cracked open my mind in a way, and it gave me the gift of seeing my country not just through a lens of shame, but through a lens of hope, and seeing the future not just through a lens of fear, but through a lens of imagination and action. I don't quite know how to put it into words, but I've been seeing the future and the possibilities of the future in a new light, and I credit that to this book. Most reviews that I write about are, oh, do I recommend it or don't I, or is it enjoyable or anything like that, and to be honest, I can't really say that with this book, because I could imagine someone, picking it up and being kind of underwhelmed. Like I said, the writing is basic, it's pragmatic, but it bloody well gets the job done. This review isn't about that. It's just about me sharing what is really a purely personal experience with this book that I in no way can promise to someone else if they also pick it up. if someone else picks this up and say, gee, you got all of that from this, is, well, yeah, all I can say is, yeah, I did. This book was so meaningful to me, and I've been thinking about it ever since, and that's really all you can ask from a book. It stands above the rest of the books I've read. It doesn't even feel like a book in a way. It felt like a gift. And just as one last addition, I will link their organisation's website in the description if you're interested in looking more into this. And then also they have a podcast called Right Country, Right Fire, which is just a short, I think it's got like 7 episodes or so it's not, ongoing. It's just a little mini series of a podcast, which has a lot of similar information about this book. I listened to the podcast after I read the book, and it was actually really enjoyable to hear the voices of many of the people that are mentioned in the book. But I also think you could go the other way and listen to the podcast and see if you're interested in this, and then read the book for more detail. So yes, anyway, that's all. Thank you for listening.